And what do you remember about the Depression? Tell me about your thoughts on the Depression.
Well, first of all, my mother was out selling life insurance. I really remember that. And she...
Let's back up. Your father died during the Depression?
Yeah, well, he died... I was born in 1929. See, I was born in the year of the crash. So I was born in 1929. He was flying in 1930 for Curtiss Wright. And the way he got the money to go through Curtiss Wright flight school was to borrow the cash value of his insurance policies.
Oh.
So they didn't, when he died, they didn't have any insurance. The cash, it was all borrowed against, so he could go through flight school. And
he died in a plane crash.
Yeah, he died in a plane crash. Structural failure with losing an aileron, and they spun into the Burbank Golf Course.
So what year was that? You were two, 1931.
1930. Wow. I think the late 1930s.
So you really don't have any memories of your dad?
Not of my dad, no.
That's too bad.
But then we moved to Oregon, and I remember living in my grandmother's boarding house, and and all this frugality, and she was kind of a serious old lady, and my mother was out. She went to work for Equitable Life Insurance, selling life insurance. And in the depth of the Depression, her first year, she sold over $1 million of life insurance in the depth of the Depression. So she made enough money. And she went back to Oregon State and got her master's degree with the money she made selling life insurance, and went to work at Oregon State and became she taught at Oregon State. She wasn't a full professor, but she taught at Oregon State. So I grew up in Portland and then Corvallis, where Oregon State is, a little kid. And when I was 10, my mother met this guy that was a great guy. Really, he really was a nice guy.
This was your stepfather?
My stepfather. His name was Dean Walker, and he was a hop grower. He was also a state senator.
You say hop grower? Hops is in for beer?
Hops is in beer, yeah.
Oh,
we grew hops. A lot of hops back then. And
this is still in Oregon.
Yeah, the hop growing district of Oregon is pretty much gone now. California and the way they irrigate and stuff is taken over. But anyway, Dean was an unusual man. He went to high school, a Catholic prep school up in Portland, on an athletic scholarship. This was back before World War I. And then he went to the University of Oregon on an athletic scholarship, and he won 16 varsity letters from his freshman year on: football, basketball, baseball, and track. He won varsity letters in all of them for all 4 years.
Wow.
And then he went on and he became...
So he was your mentor from age 10.
Yeah. He went on and he became a basketball coach at the University of Oregon. He coached their first championship team in the Pacific Coast Conference. And then he went on and became Dean of Men at the University of Oregon. And then his father died, and they were in the Depression. The hop farms were...
So all through the 30s, the Depression was pretty...
Oh, yeah.
Right up until World War II, wasn't it?
Yeah, and I remember... So we moved to Independence, Oregon, this little town of 1,800 people, and things were very tight. And Dean was driving a little old Model A with the rumble seat in back, and he'd go around the farms and carry the checkbook. And luckily he had an older brother that was the president of the local town bank, and so he got his crop loans. It costs a lot to raise, hops are very labor intensive. So he got his crop loans from the local bank that his brother was the president of. But we were land poor. We had 5 great hop farms around, but land poor, and things were tight. And old wood burning furnace, I used to go down and stoke the oak into the... We burned both fir and Douglas fir and oak. in the furnace, but oak, of course, was preferred. And it was, and I'd take my 22 out and shoot ground squirrels and stuff.
Wow.
But it was.
Did you supplement your family's food with things that you shot?
No, not really, not really. I occasionally I'd shoot a duck, not on the wing, but one that was paddling around the water, and I'd shoot it with my 22, and then Tippy would go in and we'd bring it home. But getting the feathers and stuff, processing a duck is a lot of work. Anyway, we do things like this, and
I'm really curious about the Depression, because I think that we are going into another period.
I'm afraid about that.
Do you think that we're heading into another Depression?
I think it's iffy. I think if Europe collapses, and they've been on the verge of it for a long time. Yeah, Greece has already gone bankrupt.
Spain's going down.
Spain's going down.
Portugal,
Italy. Portugal and Ireland already have been refined. If Europe collapses, that could cause us to collapse. Now, there are positives like China and Orient's growth. They're growing where Europe isn't. The United States right now is, we're limping on, we're actually growing right now between 1% and 2% a year. They're predicting 2%, but right now we're down to about 1.9%.
That's if you believe the
GDP
statistics.
growth. Huh?
That's if you believe the statistics.
Yeah, I really do. These are actually, there aren't many good magazines anymore, but this one is called The Economist. And in the back of it, it shows all the nations and their current growth rates of their GDP. Now, yeah, it's reported by the nations, and you're right, some of the statistics are bad. Particularly the statistic about inflation, because our government has so many things that are tied to inflation, like how much Social Security goes up every year, it has to go up by a amount, that they tend to keep inflation, the official inflation, at the low end, so they don't have to.
You know what my biggest fear is? That we're living a lie. That, if you just take the statistics, like our national debt is almost $16 trillion.
Oh, I know.
That, if you do the math, I did the math myself. Somebody told me and I didn't believe it. Right now the population of the United States is 314 million people. If you divide 314 million by 16 trillion, that means that every single person that lives in this country owes $50,000 plus. And that doesn't take into account the underfunded stuff like Social Security.
Exactly. And I've gone through that kind of math too. The real figure is when you put all these things that are off balance sheet, and not just our debt, is that every child born today has over him 200 grand of federal debt and commitments to
the day they're born.
The day they're born, 200 grand. Think about that.
Yeah. It's an impossible thing to get out of. I don't think this country has any hope of digging out of this hole. What new technology is going to stimulate the economy so much that we're going to start getting back up?
Well, first of all, we do. I don't think we will.
You're more of an optimist than I am.
That's what, we're at the point now where we're not to the point where Greece is and so forth. But we and Germany and China is in great shape. Japan's not. Even though we got this big debt, we can service it. And if we balance our budget, so every year we're not adding to that debt, then we could chip away at it and take it down slowly.
But we're not balancing the budget.
No.
And
No.
the the ability to pay taxes from this country has decreased by at least 25% because there's that many people out of work. People's incomes have gone down. They've lost their value in their homes.
I'll give you another statistic. This is really scary. Instead of taking individual people, take the households in the United States. All the households in the United States. Of all the households in the United States, only 50% of those households pay taxes.
I know that.
That means the other 50% is living off the 50% that are paying tax. So 50% of us are supporting the other 50% in the United States, and yet I hear Obama and all these people screaming about these goddamn multimillionaires that aren't paying their share and so forth. Well, I'm sure there are a few that aren't, and that's bad. But actually, the rich pay way out of proportion to that. You know, the percentage of the 1% richest people, they pay about 10% of the total taxes in the United States.
Yeah.
And the 10% pay, I don't know, 50% of the taxes in the United States and so forth. So the rich not paying their share is kind of bullshit. And some aren't. But basically, we've got a system which, when you're at the point when 50% of your income you don't have discretionary choice over, you give it to the government so the bureaucrats can live on it, and you only can invest and do what you want with your 50%. That's really bad because, see, people, individuals make much better investment and what we call asset allocation decisions. You know, am I going to buy a car? Am I going to buy a house? Am I going to put it in savings? Individuals that have some fear in them, if I don't make the right decisions and so forth, am I going to run out of money? I'm going to be out of a job. I can't support my family. So individuals with that kind of fear tend to make the best decisions about how things should be spent. And that the money gets allocated in the more productive assets, building businesses, small businesses and big business. It really is important. When the government takes that money, first of all, it goes through all sorts of bureaucracies. So about every dollar of taxes is collected, about 50% gets used up in the government bureaucracies before it gets invested in, whether it's Social Security or rebuilding infrastructure or whatever it is. So your only tax dollars, only about 50% get invested in productive and not always productive enterprises. So anyway, the government is a lousy way to use to make investment decisions and decisions about how to spend money. But they've already are taking 50% in the U.S., which is supposedly, you know, a democracy that, you know,
We're being lied to. We are being lied to.
Yeah, we're not a free enterprise. I've written, I'm writing all these heritage letters to my grandkids, and I've got one that's called Libertarian. I'm not really a Republican, I'm a Libertarian. And Libertarians say, and these were the guys that founded our country, they say that God gives everyone the right to make their own way in life, plus the responsibility for themselves. And that government should be just big enough to do things that you can't do on your own, like protect your defense. So government should take care of your country's defense. But other than that, individuals should be allowed to make their own way in life, and that they'll make the best decisions in terms how, as I just said, to invest the country's resources and their resources. And I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll print out this little thing, my libertarian thing, and let you take it home and show it to your kids and stuff.
I'd like to see it.
Yeah, I really feel it deeply now, especially now. The other thing the government's doing, God, just someone like me, I've worked hard all my life. I've had good success.
You're 83 now.
83. You know, I've been working with small high-tech companies from my beginning of my career, and the last half of my career, I would, you know, guys would come to me, scientists or whatever, with an idea. And first of all, I make sure that it was you could patent it, because if you're going to get venture capital, it's got to be an idea, it's got to be a product that has proprietary protection. So even if it's a good idea and everyone else go out and build it when you do, you know, so it has to be proprietary. And then I make sure that it had a good business model. We go over that. Then I'd write their business plan and help them develop a presentation to go to the venture capitalists. And they wouldn't pay me for it, they couldn't. So I'd take equity, founder stock, in their companies. And then, you know, not all of them, you know, I lost some, but the ones that did make it, then I'd have a 1 or 2% equity position in them, and I eventually make money off of them. And I got to the later part of my career where I didn't have to have regular income every day, so that's what I did. I just kept, up until I was 79, I was helping start little high-tech companies. It was fun.
You're a smart guy.
But anyway, now I've got some money. I don't have, you know, I don't have any Social Security, but I don't have any pensions. I never worked for a big company where I ended up with a big pension or something. So I got to live off my own investments. It's scary today. The stock market's a scary place to be in, and a dangerous place in ways, although I'm still heavily invested in the stock market. Can't buy bonds. The stupid government is trashing our dollar, and actually they've got interest rates so low, a 10-year bond is selling for 1.5% to 2% interest. It's paying 1.5% to 2% interest. The inflation rate right now is 3%. So you got a negative time value of money when you buy a 10-year federal bond and you're getting paid 1.5%, and you got an you got an inflation rate that's 3%. That means you got a negative, you're losing 1.5% buying power every year. So bonds, bond market, you know, money market funds, savings account.
Well, savings account doesn't even give 1%.
Yeah, you cannot make enough. You have a negative time value of money. You can't keep up with inflation. Then you have the stock market, of course.
And that's a gamble.
That's a big gamble right now. And then you have real estate. Now, real estate is going to be a good asset class to start investing in pretty soon, because we've had this horrendous, but up until this year or maybe next year, real estate's been terrible. So all the different asset classes that a retired guy like me could invest in are scary, bad, the wrong things to do. You sit in cash and you can't earn anything on it. Well, that means that I'm got way more than I should. I have way more than I should in the stock market. That's what I do. I try to buy really good companies that are still growing and paying dividends. And but the stock market is my net worth goes.
You're insecure.
Oh, am I ever? It's.
My mom was totally invested in mutual funds.
Yeah.
And about 3 years ago, she lost 40% of her net worth. Boom, overnight.
Yeah. Yeah. The stock market went down 40%.
Yeah.
Yeah, 2007 to the bottom of the market in early 2009. Yeah. Lost 40%. Yeah. And a lot of mutual funds lost more than that. A lot of them lost 50%.
So what do you do?
Well, that's the problem. There isn't any good answer right now. And the reason there isn't is because our government policies. first of all, keeping interest rates so artificially low. You know, when I went to Stanford and I took an economics course. And one of the things they talked about is, you know, what makes interest rates what they are? You know, what makes it? Well, the underlying theory was that interest rates on the average should mirror the growth rate of your economy. So if you're living in a country like the United States where you're growing, your GDP, gross domestic product, is growing like 3% a year on the average, and that's kind of what, over a long, long period of time, we've done about 3% a year. Sometimes we're doing 6%, and sometimes we're negative in depressions, but our economy grows about 3% a year. Then if you got 2% a year inflation, you add that to it. So interest rates should equal the underlying growth of the economy plus the inflation. Because why do people loan money if they can't do as well as the economy itself and cover inflation? So over a long period of time, and you see all my charts up there on the wall, so I've got, it shows what interest rates have done and what everything else is. Now our federal government, because of this big debt they've got, and they've got to service and so forth, there's only one way to do it, and that's to trash the value of the dollar and to keep interest rates very low. They say they're keeping interest rates very low to stimulate investment because you can borrow at low rates and businessmen will invest. Well, businessmen aren't investing very much right now. They're saying, geez, we got this crazy government that in December, if they don't get together, that all the Bush tax cuts are going to go out, and so we're going to have higher taxes, and there's another thing that we're going to this cliff in December where if Congress hasn't acted before that, all the Bush tax cuts go out the window and our taxes go up another 20% or so. And to offset that, there's and I kind of like this part of it, there are big cuts in government spending. Now on the short term though, big cuts in government spending do hurt the economy. On the long haul it's good, you don't want a big government. But on the very short haul, and it's happened in Greece, and you really cut back what the government's putting into the economy, and of course it slows down the economy.
Yeah.
And so,
plus the infrastructure starts to fail.
Oh yeah, I could go on and on about all that stuff.
Yeah. I agree with you 100% on everything that you say. I think that we have a recipe for disaster that is unsurmountable.
Oh no.
I think it's unsurmountable. How can we change the economy to get out? How can we dig out of this hole? I mean, the hole is so
it's
deep.
Really very simple. It really is. It's politically tough if you're a politician and you want to get elected. It's tough, but it's really very simple. First of all, you balance the budget. What do you and I do? The state of California has to balance its budget. The federal government doesn't. All you do is balance the budget. Where are some of the areas you can do this very quickly? Well, first of all, we've got farmers now, and because of the rising prices for grain and farm products, farmers are making a hell of a lot of money. But they're getting federal subsidies for growing their crops that were started, those subsidies were programs started back in the Depression. And because they got big political lobbying in Washington with all the politicians and a real strong lobby, we're still paying federal subsidies to farmers to grow their crops when the value of those crops have gone up so much that they're making lots of money. They don't need my taxpayer dollars. There are all sorts of areas in the federal government where we can cut a lot of money out.
But it won't happen though. It won't happen.
Well, it won't if we keep electing guys like Obama. Yeah, you're right.
What's
But
the
we
alternative?
already did, one of the
Do you
things we
think
did.
Romney's going to do any better?
Oh, yeah.
You think so?
No, he's not
He's,
my,
he's,
listen,
he's just another political puppet.
he's not that bad, but
They all are.
yes, a lot of, to some degree, you're right.
It's
But
not-
he will do better. Listen, we had a glimmer in the off election 2 years ago when we elected a Republican Congress. And the Republican Congress got in there, and you know, we got a liberal press, so everything you read about the Republican Congress, these stupid assholes, you know, they're stopping our government, they're doing all the wrong things. Well, what our Republicans went in, it said very simply, you've got to balance the budget. The federal government's got to balance the budget, and we won't, and you can't do it by raising taxes because that reduces the incentive of hardworking people and private industry to go do the thing. So you got to cut government spending, and they have disrupted, but they eventually have, in just the last 2 years, really cut government spending from what it would have been if Obama had been free to do his thing.
You can say they've cut government spending, but if you look at the facts, from the time
budget's still
Obama,
going up. Our spending level's still going up.
they're out of control. They're spiraling out
Yeah,
of control.
but it would have been a lot worse if those guys weren't doing what they're doing.
But, you know, the way I look at it, there's only so much money,
Exactly.
and if you owe more money than there is, that's an unsurmountable problem.
That's what happened to Greece
Yeah.
and Portugal.
That's right.
And it's happening to Spain.
And
And it may happen to all of Europe except Germany. Germany is
Unless Germany keeps bailing everybody else out.
yeah, you're right. You're right. This is beginning to happen. Well, there are big exceptions. China, India, Korea is a great economy. Singapore. There are a lot of places in the Orient that are balancing their budget and driving ahead and have thriving economies the way we used to, and they're doing things right. And nothing. You've got Japan. Remember back in the 70s where everyone was saying, oh, Japan's going to eat our lunch. They're going to end up owning the U.S. They're buying all this U.S. property. Japan was the juggernaut, you know. Well, they had a real estate bubble, just like we did in 2007. This was about 15 years ago, though. They had a real estate bubble. You know, their real estate was priced way overpriced, and all of a sudden it crashed, and banks got in trouble and so forth. And Japan did exactly what the U.S. is doing now. They lowered interest rates down to 1 or 2%. They bailed out their banks, and instead of letting the banks just fail and starting over, but anyway, we are doing in the United States exactly what Japan. Oh, and they invested a lot. The government invested a lot in infrastructure. You know, Japan built high-speed railroads and bridges to nowhere, and Japan really has good infrastructure right now. Ours is crumbling, but it didn't help their economy. Japan has been in a recession for the last 15 years and still is. And what's the United States government doing? Exactly what the Japanese government did to try to get out of it. It blows my mind. It's so simple, and it's right there before us. And wait.
On that note,
Okay.
God.
You really got